I was telling somebody just minutes ago, our Wednesday schedule here at the Voice of College Football has become so ridiculous. Ridiculous in a good way. But man, I'm going to have to wake up a half hour earlier just to type out the schedule to post here on YouTube and on our X account. Our official X account, by the way, that we just relaunched on July 1st. Hopefully you are following us on X, rankings, ratings, discussion, debate, engagement there on X with the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you all being here. And again, my goodness gracious. Right after this show, we've got Buckeyes live at 11. We've got Florida State live at 6. We've got an Oregon live show coming up tonight. Again, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Special time for the Oregon show with Exploring with Ben and Spaz, because they've got a special guest in Yogi Roth of the Big Ten Network. So make that a destination over on the Oregon channel, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Yogi Roth of the Big Ten Network will be joining Ben and Spaz. Also at 6, we've got Florida State live. That is merely with me and the rest of the crew. 7 p.m. Eastern, our Miami show. 8, West Virginia and Clemson and Notre Dame at the same time. You need 3 screens at 8 p.m. Notre Dame, Clemson, and then the West Virginia show as well. I like to prep for this show, but by the time I type all that and work out all the logistics of all the @ symbols and all the links, then here we are. We do have a special guest coming up here in just a few minutes. Ryan Herrings of Locked On Badgers. Of course, Wisconsin's huge date against Alabama coming up at Camp Randall Stadium. Maybe one of the offside periphery benefits of this expanded college football playoff, possibly, that we're seeing, especially in the SEC, teams traveling, teams going places. I don't know if this is something that the SEC decided regardless of playoff expansion. I got to think it was spearheaded by Greg Sankey because it's all coming at the same time. Auburn traveling to Penn State a couple years ago. Alabama going up to Camp Randall Stadium to play Wisconsin. Florida made a trip outside the Sunshine State for the first time since 1989. When they went to Syracuse. Florida outside of their own state for a non-conference game for the first time, for a true road game when they played Utah last year. So we see the SEC lightening up a little bit. LSU going to the Rose Bowl to take on UCLA a couple years ago as well. The lines are open, and believe me, the conversation is open as well. We put on the title last night as we entered Wednesday. Well, we've already seen some teams plummet, and not necessarily plummet from the elite down, but plummeting from wherever their expected spot was, and really off to rough starts. And the thought process is, okay, is this just an issue with this team? Growing pains, development, young team, transition, couple bad bounces, that sort of thing, versus culture issue, coaching issue, program issue. The first two that come to mind, Florida State, of course, our lucky prize winner for biggest downfall of the season thus far. And it's going to take some time to shake that one if they are able to do it. They've got a date against Memphis coming up in Tallahassee this weekend. Is just a touchdown favorite. Florida State would have been a substantial favorite against Memphis just weeks ago, or last season, or the season before. But the Florida State situation, and again, we've got our FSU show at 6 p.m. Eastern time. I like Mike Norvell as a coach. I believe that he is an excellent football coach, built that program, built a culture there. Now, each coach is navigating the transfer portal. Now, it's one thing to navigate something that you have complete control over. Let's say you had some kind of law change, policy change within a company or statewide or otherwise, and you can control what you need to do within your company to better handle those policy changes or those law changes. Okay. Happens in the real estate world on a fairly regular basis. I know some realtors and some loan officers, and they tell me about federal law changes concerning real estate and how they have to adjust. Well, there's competition out there, but they have to adjust, and they can control everything in front of them. In the world of college football with the transfer portal, you've got competition that you cannot control. And trying to find that happy medium between high school recruiting and the transfer portal is a difficult one to navigate. But that's why these guys are making the big bucks. And for Florida State, it's more than appeared. It's obvious. It is factual that they have relied on the transfer portal for much of their star power on their team. Their defensive line has been starred by transfer portal additions the last few seasons, with Jermaine Johnson going back 2 seasons. And then, of course, the last 2 years, or Jermaine Johnson actually the year before. And then you had Jared Verse and Braden Fisk coming in last season. Of course, their quarterback play has been exclusively transfer players, which, to be fair, most of the starting quarterbacks now in college football are transfers. Jordan Travis was a transfer during the time in which it wasn't that frequent. And Mike Norvell has to be credited with at least partial credit to Jordan Travis's development. Now he's got a whole different deal with DJ Uiagalelei. And as we discussed on the Michigan podcast with the Michigan situation at quarterback, and as we discussed last night on our USC show with Matt Zemek, in particular, Tim and Matt, but Matt and I brought to light the quarterback evaluation is now added another layer. There's another layer added to the quarterback evaluation that is so crucial for all these head coaches. This would be an interesting study as well. Every time there's a job opening in college football for a head coach, you typically make that hire, and then we evaluate it as that's an offensive guy, that's a defensive guy. Lincoln Riley, Ryan Day, on down the line, offensive guys. Nick Saban at the time, defensive guy. Now, once you win 6 national championships, or a 7th at LSU, then you no longer become attached to one side of the ball. You're simply the greatest of all time. But there's either an offensive lean or defensive lean. Mike Elko, Texas A&M, defensive guy. If somebody could do a study to make some kind of evaluation as to whether it has mattered, whether you're an offensive guy, which you would think would give you an advantage of evaluating your quarterback situation, the personnel available in the portal, the personnel available at the high school level, and then how to equip those guys, whomever you choose at the quarterback position, to succeed. Whether you've got the arsenal, the tools on your coaching staff between you, your quarterback's coach, your offensive coordinator, to develop that quarterback. Would love to see that breakdown, go through all the coaching hires and the quarterbacks they have selected, those quarterbacks' expected performance level, their expected production. We talking about a 5-star, 3-star. We're talking about a backup quarterback acquired through the transfer portal. Are we talking about Sam Hartman? And then what those coaches were able to do it, and see if there's a difference between offensive-minded coaches and developing quarterback play. First, making that evaluation. So we talk about development a lot with quarterback play and all the positions, but it's also about evaluation, selecting the right guy. And now with the transfer portal, you've got that next layer of selection to make. And whether to make that selection, who do you select if you have enough power to get whom you want. So there's that competition for the best players, of course. And then if you have that pull to be able to select one of the better quarterbacks in this case, are you making a true best selection for your program? Or if you choose not to go into the transfer portal, look at these stark contrasts through week 2. You've got Michigan not going to the transfer portal, and you've got a walk-on quarterback starting in Davis Warren. You have the expected starter by many, media and others, Alex Orji, as the backup quarterback, as a specialty player, a packaged player that comes in and runs the offense, or doesn't necessarily run the offense. A play's called in from the sideline. He takes the snap and he runs for it. I would love to know if I could get into one quarterback situation this offseason going into this season, it would be the Michigan quarterback situation of what they saw in these quarterbacks. How much of a discussion was the portal, the decision that was made, the competition in camp? Would love to be in the meeting rooms with the quarterbacks and with just the coaches talking about the quarterbacks, evaluating those guys. 3 guys in play. We'll include Jack Tuttle, who is going to be available to play this weekend. And the evaluation as it stands right now, was missed. Michigan missed. They whiffed on this quarterback evaluation as it stands right now. Davis Warren is not a freshman who can possibly play his way into the role because he's got exceptional arm talent, ability. He's a phenom, and he just had a mediocre start. No, he's a guy that's been on campus a long time, should know the offense. What he has been able to overcome off the field, which of course deals with on the field from a physical standpoint, is to be admired. So we are simply dealing with the on-field performance, of course, but is to be admired concerning Davis Warren. And I don't know all the details, but I know that it's mighty impressive. So Michigan whiffed. Auburn had an opportunity to go into the transfer portal. Hugh Freeze, offensive guy. Excellent job at Arkansas State. Excellent job at Liberty. Ole Miss, a bit of a dirty past there, but working through all of it, hey, his team's produced on the field. He beat Nick Saban twice. He went to big bowl games. He had really good teams at Ole Miss, and his quarterback play, Hugh Freeze quarterback play at Ole Miss, Matt Corral, Chad Kelly, guys that obviously showed they were not NFL quarterbacks, but they were top flight SEC quarterbacks, not to the very top rung, Bryce Young type of quarterbacks, but very good top flight SEC quarterbacks. So Hugh Freeze comes to Auburn. And if you could list one big reason why Hugh Freeze was hired at one of the top 15 jobs in the country, is because he can run an offense. Well, the passing game was horrible last year, and that was due to lack of weapons, offensive line, and quarterback. All contributed. But Hugh Freeze decided that Peyton Thorne is the guy. Now, when Peyton Thorne has taken a hit at Auburn, I have stuck up for him to a certain extent to more accurately portray who this guy is, what kind of player he's been, that he's been a guy that can run an offense that is mobile, not spectacular, mobile, has a decent arm, could be a decent college quarterback, has been a decent college quarterback at Michigan State, but is not the guy, is not an elite guy, is not the guy that should be shouldering the offense. And so Auburn had all this dysfunction in the passing game last year. Their passing game, it's like It's kind of a microcosm of Iowa's offense over the last 5 years. How in the world can it be this bad? But yes, the Iowa roots run much deeper. And by the way, check out a great rant. 98% of it was Corey Bratta. The other 2% was me on the Iowa channel, Iowa Live yesterday, about all the coaching blunders that I, in watching 2 and 3 games at the same time, even though I watched the complete Iowa State game, I actually caught it sometime in the first quarter with Iowa dominating, but basically I caught up with it and watched the entire game. Did not realize the blunders of Kirk Ferentz and his staff. So again, let me summarize because our guest is on the line here. Coaching quarterback evaluations. Very key, always has been, but even more so, obviously, in the last 10 or 15 years with the proliferation of the pass game. So obviously the quarterback is much more important today in college football, throwing the ball 55 or 60% of the time than 20 years ago when they were throwing the ball maybe 30, 35% of the time, number one. Number two, with the extra layer of the transfer portal, the decision every offseason to say, do we go to the portal, grab somebody, or do we like what we have here? And if we continue to go into the portal, are we sending a signal to possible recruits that would sign here that say, hey, you always sign players above me and bring them in over the guys that you could be playing and developing? So that's a pattern here, i.e., what might be happening at Notre Dame. They're 2 for 2 now since the transfer portal's been an option there with Sam Hartman and Riley Leonard, and them signing quarterbacks above the players that they have on the squad. All right. Appreciate you all being here. The Voice of College Football, Bama and Wisconsin get together on Saturday at Camp Randall Stadium. And trying to bring our guest on here. We have all sorts of issues here. There we go.
Hey, from the conversation yesterday, can you hear me?
I thought we had our guest here. Dan, what's going on today?
You had like some very interesting thoughts about like the transfers, especially like on the quarterback position, right? Because what was the stat? Like 30% of them are like transfers.
I don't know
this year.
What the stat is. We could count them up. I bet it's higher than that.
Yes, but when I was talking about like yesterday, like culture, identity, development, etc. And of course, I'm like an OU fan. Jason White was never going to play in the NFL, but he won the Heisman. You can be an awesome. Dylan Gabriel will never make it in the NFL. Doesn't have the arm strength, doesn't have the size, etc., or the speed like Kyler Murray.
The only difference I would make with Jason White and Dylan Gabriel is that I fully expect Dylan Gabriel to earn a paycheck in the NFL. I don't think he's going to be a Jason White and never make a roster. I think he'll be on a roster. I expect him to play for 5 or 6, 7 years and be
as a backup
somewhere. But yeah, you're right. He's not going to be the choice to be on the field as an NFL quarterback.
But how does that affect the game and how we evaluate how it goes from game to game and time to time, especially at the beginning of the season? Like Jackson Arnold is very highly thought of, but if 3 out of the offensive line that's all portals is hurt and he only has one of his 3 receivers that are like healthy, are we being unfair to him on how he played against like Houston? And like, how do you make sense of it with everyone being like, well, I'm paying money and I want success now? Like, how do you explain Oregon? Because Dylan's playing well at Oregon. The problem's not Dylan at Oregon, for example. The problem was not Bryce Young at the UCF game last week. Penn State struggled at Bowling Green. I don't know how to make sense of all of it like on a week to week basis, because I'm not going to say they're kids, but they're not full pros, and with so much churn, I don't know how we can make sense of things week to week.
Oh, well, absolutely.
Like who's going to show up? And I wanted your thoughts on that, because Wisconsin could very well go out and beat Alabama.
Sure.
They shouldn't, but it could happen. Or look at what like Tulane did to Kansas State just last week, or UCF to Alabama, or Houston to OU, or what's happened to FSU that has relied on the portal so much and the churn. It's become a pro league, but without any rules.
Well, you're bringing up all the...
And at least for me, it makes me hard to predict. That's why I'm not betting this year.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I had the worst week I've ever had predicting games last weekend. So my record was atrocious. But I expect it to be what it always is. I don't necessarily see it to that degree all over the place. I still have to think, and we'd have to go game by game, that the Vegas favorite wins 75% of the time.
Well, they at least win 51% of the time, or Vegas would not be Vegas. The house always wins.
Well, the house always wins. Vegas doesn't care. Vegas doesn't need to get the game correct. The Vegas doesn't even need to be right 51% of the time. Vegas just needs equal betting on both sides.
Yeah.
That's all they need.
Well, you understand that probably like better than me, but I always really, really appreciate your show, and I am predicting Tulane to upset OU this week.
Okay.
If OU was healthy, OU would roll, but when you have all the receivers down, even the makeshift offensive line is like hurt, and a young quarterback, I think that's too much to overcome in a week. Well, and I think Tulane's better in Houston.
Well, Dan, you'll want to tune in tomorrow. We've got Parker Thune from OU Insider, who's going to be a guest tomorrow. So we'll break down Oklahoma and their offensive line issues and their wide receiver issues, which their wide receiver room looked really stacked at the beginning of the year, but you can only lose so many guys.
Yeah, well, I always really appreciate your content. What's your number one? I gave you my number one upset for the week.
Okay.
That I wouldn't be shocked by. What would be your number one upset for this coming week?
Well, I'd be throwing darts at this point because I haven't looked at the games. I've looked at the games, but I predict the games late in the week. Number one upset. Yeah, I would just be throwing a dart at the board.
Maybe my number
Notre Dame, Purdue. I think you hit a good one. I don't even know what the spread is. Do you know what the spread is on Oklahoma Tulane?
I think it's like 13, 14 points, 2 touchdowns.
Okay, that would be the one right there, because you know what happened a couple of years ago with a 2-10 Tulane team. Now they're completely different teams now, but still.
Yeah, I know. I was at that game. I was sweating it.
You were at that game, yeah. Fourth down play at midfield in the game. But Tulane's been arguably the best Group of 5 program over the last 3 or 4 years. And we saw it against Kansas State last week. They had a 10-point lead. Absolutely. That would not surprise me in the slightest.
I think people are too down on Florida would be my number 2. I think Florida probably beats A&M at home with their new freshman quarterback.
Yeah.
And that would be interesting.
Yeah. So DJ Lagway, of course, had a just monster game against Samford. It was Samford, not the Texas A&M front seven.
Of course.
See, I like that pick as well because Texas A&M is offensively challenged. So if you get a team into a game in which they're offensively challenged, that obviously helps out your defense considerably because a certain percentage of the stops that you make on plays aren't because you played good defense. It's because the quarterback missed a throw, the wide receivers didn't run a good route, they dropped it. There's a gaffe along the offensive front. There
The
was a
offensive
false
line
start,
held.
all these things. So when somebody's offensively challenged, that helps out a defense considerably, and that's where Texas A&M is right now. I'm not a believer in their offense. I think their quarterback's good, Connor Wigman, but the rest of it's a mess. They don't have any downfield playmakers, and their offensive line was an issue last year. And if you watch the Notre Dame game, it's an issue again this year, apparently. And the game's in the swamp.
Well, that's the biggest problem with like OU's wide receiver room being like hurt. There's no one left that can take the lid off of the defense. And then like with the offensive line struggles, that causes run problems. So they're going to have to dink and dunk like Oregon did against Idaho or Boise State if they're going to win. But I don't know if they'll do that this week. But anyways, Mark, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. I'll let you get to your other callers.
Thanks, Dan.
But,
appreciate you stopping by.
Hope I enhance the conversation somewhat.
Absolutely. Good to see you.
You too. Bye.
We will keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. For some reason, our background that we're so happy with that Justin Adams on the Nebraska channel built for us, I have to configure the transitions on which configurations to select to give us a smooth transition. Keeps moving people the wrong direction. All right, that's my issue. Yeah, I did not expect to fall into this quarterback discussion, but it is an intriguing one. And I was in the middle of explaining the decisions made by some across the country, Sharon Moore, Hugh Freeze, of course, Dabo Sweeney. We expected no less there to stand pat. Other quarterback situations in which those are the three best examples I can come up with right now, where I think it's a pretty strong lean right now that the head coach made the wrong decision. The best example on the other end of the spectrum, where we've got a quarterback evaluator who made apparently the right decision, at least through 2 weeks, in which he's taking an inexperienced quarterback and bypassed the transfer portal and said, you've shown me enough during your time on campus. We've developed you. You're ready to roll. And of course, he had the big audition against Louisville in the Holiday Bowl, and that was Miller Moss. Lincoln Riley's been accused of a lot of things, but hopefully nobody out there has ever accused him of not being able to spot quarterback ability and to evaluate and develop it. And now we've got a USC-Michigan game coming up in 10 days, roughly, that we all have to assess so much differently today than we did on August 30th. Wow, has that situation completely flipped in regards to how we evaluate the two teams going into the game? I don't know what the Vegas number is or will be. I got to think that Michigan's going to be a 3 to 4 point favorite, something like that. But USC looks good. They look good on both sides of the ball. Don't discount the Utah State game, because even though it is Utah State, it's the easiest game on USC's schedule. They should win that game by a ton. Previous USC teams would have given up 20 or 25 points in that game. That would have been a 55-24 USC win. That's what that would have been. But now we get 48-0. We get the Pete Carroll edition of USC in terms of a score, at least, against Utah State. So much more to prove. They've only had the one big test. But again, the Utah State game is a good indicator that USC is transformed itself on defense. All right, a team that's going to need a huge defensive effort coming up on Saturday. And as we discuss transfer quarterbacks, we've got a situation, of course, at Wisconsin, where they bring in Tyler Van Dyke, and they're one of the many that are relying on a transfer situation and some magic to happen there. We got Ryan Herrings on the line from Locked On Badgers to break down some Wisconsin football. Ryan, what's going on?
Nah, nothing. Just very grateful to be here as always, man. Get to talk some college football, and you're right. Huge weekend for Wisconsin with Bama coming into Camp Randall, so we are very excited for it.
I watched the Central Michigan game, and of course, Wisconsin trailed by a point, I believe, at one point in the fourth quarter. I think that was like a 14-13 game. Mm-hmm. They got the muffed punt, or let's not call it a muffed punt, because that would blame the kick returner. Of course, it was just one of those deals where they lost sight of the ball, track of the ball, kicks off somebody, and Wisconsin takes advantage. They put together 2 touchdown drives, skate on for the win. I did not see the game last weekend, similar score, where it looked fairly comfortable at some point in the second half, but not necessarily a runaway. So based on what you've seen the last 2 games, we've got the whole spread them out, speed and space narrative of what Wisconsin football is supposed to be. We still have remnants of run it first, ram it down your throats, and whatever Luke Fickell and Phil Longo want that to be, and that combination. So let's start on the offensive side and what you've seen so far.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on it. It feels very much like an identity crisis where they're still trying to figure out between what Wisconsin was, what Phil Longo traditionally has done with his air raid system. It doesn't feel like they fully figured it out. And I was talking about this the other day. It actually feels a little bit like a spread version of Paul Chryst, where like we're going to be methodical. They've had multiple 14, 15, 16 play drives. We're just going to take what the defense gives us. We're going to slowly march down the field. We're going to win time of possession. And this is historically not what Phil Longo has done. Even when he was running the ball really well at North Carolina, which he did, he was in the 50th time of possession type of a team. And Wisconsin right now is dominating time of possession, but they're not generating explosive plays. They're having a very hard time finding those explosive vertical shots. And that was an issue last year as well for Wisconsin. So it's tough to figure out exactly, are they saving a few things for this meat of the schedule? Did they just go into those 2 games and say, we can just lean on these teams and just kind of wear them down? I'm not sure. Phil Longo's talked about it. He had some interesting comments this week in media availability. Basically said fans should, and I'm paraphrasing, but fans should be happy with wins and not worry so much about kind of how the sausage is made, which big picture, that's fine. However, you're not going to be able to march methodically down the field, I don't think, against an Alabama, right? You're going to need to generate some plays that threaten their corners, that threaten their safeties. Otherwise, they're just going to put 8, 9 in the box. And at that point, you're not going to march down the field against a defense with those caliber of athletes. So inconsistent, feels like they're still looking for their identity. I think some of that is tied to Tyler Van Dyke, who has been okay, hasn't thrown an interception, but also hasn't done a lot to really make defenses pay for putting extra people into the box.
Yeah, it seems easy in this type situation to say, well, if you rely on the short passing game, those guys should be open. And if you just dump off these 3-yard, 5-yard balls in the flat, a lot of bubble screens, a lot of motion to get guys free, bootlegs, dump it off to the tight. A lot of this short stuff that, hey, as long as you're completing the balls, even if they're tackling in space, you just move the ball down the field. But the longer the drive, the more likely it is that something's going to happen wrong. You commit a penalty, and then you're throwing in tight windows and spaces against elite athletes, and they start to read things and jump routes, pick passes off. You start to throw into coverage where there's going to be a tipped ball at the line of scrimmage or deflected pass broken up that's going to go somewhere where, again, Central Michigan players may not have the reaction time to get to it, but Alabama players will, and bad things start to happen if you're that predictable.
Yeah, I agree completely. There's a reason bend but don't break exists, right? There's a reason that term exists, because it is hard, especially at the college level. It's hard to methodically march down the field consistently against good teams. You said it. You're going to have an illegal formation. You're going to have a dropped pass. And then suddenly you're 2nd and 10. And if you haven't been able to generate those passes, Alabama's just going to tee off. So it's been a big discussion point for Wisconsin fans right now. Tyler Van Dyke, I think, is 15th in the conference in the Big Ten in yards per attempt. Listen, if you go out and get a Tyler Van Dyke, what's the scouting report on TVD? It's huge arm, right? The ability to push the ball vertically, big frame. It's not consistent dink and dunk, like we're going to be super efficient quarterback. That's not his game. That's not what he's ever been. So part of me just has a hard time thinking this is the plan, because otherwise, why are you getting the guy with the rocket arm? Why are you getting the guy who can theoretically push the ball down the field into windows Wisconsin traditionally hasn't been able to? So I think some of it, I do think there's an element of we've played 2 teams we can just kind of bully around a little bit. And that can bite you, right? That week 1 game, you mentioned it. They were down by 1 point in the 3rd quarter. You got to be careful messing around. I think there's an element of they haven't thrown it all out there, but I also don't think, and I don't believe that teams just flip switches after 2 weeks, right? So I don't think you're going to see a brand new version. I think this is some version of what Wisconsin's going to be, hopefully with a little bit more ability to either through the run game or through the pass game to generate those explosive plays. But I think you're completely correct. You're not going to do that consistently against the better defenses.
And unfortunately, this is where schedule comes into play. And for Wisconsin, they've got one of the tougher ones in the country, versus there can be some teams and will be some teams that we will review that could have the same offensive and defensive production as a Wisconsin, but meander their way through a schedule that has few landmines and have an impressive record because of it. But Wisconsin doesn't have that luxury. You've talked about the Tyler Van Dyke's arm strength. And yeah, he had an 8 or 9 game stretch at Miami in 2021, which was a long, long time ago now, where he looked as good as anybody, throwing up 350 a week and 3 and 4 touchdown passes. And the combination of injuries and Josh Gaddis's offense the next year, which was not good. I think a lot of things worked against him, but also his own decision-making, not the best. He threw a pass against Central Michigan where he was on the right hash, and he whipped this thing all the way across the field to the left sideline. And the announcers were raving about his arm talent. And of course, it was impressive. The corner just missed picking the ball off. And so he fitted into a tight window on a high risk, low reward kind of throw. But again, if you're out playing 7-on-7, it's impressive. But my thought was immediately don't throw that pass in a couple of weeks, because that Alabama corner will have, because the Central Michigan corner just missed it by that much. Don't be doing that in a couple of weeks, because it'll be going back the other way.
Yeah, I know exactly the play you're talking about is a throw to Trechka Kahuna, the redshirt freshman Badger fans are excited about. And I had the exact same thought. I was talking to my buddy. I'm like, that's a super risky throw. And my buddy said, no, it's just an NFL arm talent. And he's really sharp. And I was like, I don't know, man. I feel like that's a pick, not just against Bama. You mentioned in 2 weeks, Bama. That's a pick against Iowa. That's a pick against Penn State. That's a pick against Oregon. And you mentioned it too. It's a low risk throw. Even if you complete it, that doesn't break the back of the defense. He had another throw in that game where rolling out to the right sideline, tried to kind of thread it back, got tipped up. He hasn't thrown a pick, but there's been 2 or 3 passes where I think good secondaries probably make him pay. And which I got to be honest, that's, to me, there's a part of that that's okay, because that's the negative part of TVD that we had heard about, right? I came into the season expecting a couple of those throws with Tyler Van Dyke, because I've seen him the last couple of years. The problem is we're not seeing the other version of the Tyler Van Dyke that we thought we might be getting, where he's throwing, again, I keep going back to it and I'm beating a dead horse, but for a year and 2 games into the Phil Longo era, they have not been able to push the ball downfield or find explosive plays. So you can live with some of those risky throws if you're getting the benefits of also hitting some of those deeper passes. But when you're not getting that and you're getting some of the risky throws, it's a difficult winning proposition for Tyler Van Dyke. And in that case, if you're not getting the best of him, I just don't know what the upside of the offense is if you can't push the ball down the field.
Yeah, he had another throw in that game in the red zone where it looked like he just tried to throw the ball through 3 or 4 guys, and one of them deflected it and just hit the ground, and they just lost the down. But it was way too risky for that to be done. And there's a difference between doing that and having a one-on-one situation where you're throwing into coverage, but you're trusting your wideout to be the better player on a one-on-one situation, and you're hopefully throwing it in such a way that it's very unlikely that it's going to get picked versus what he tends to do from time to time. We got Ryan Herring on the line. You can catch his work. Ryan's at Locked On Badgers. Ryan, where's the best place to find what you've got going on this weekend? What do you have going on this week?
A lot of Alabama content. Talked to a couple of Alabama guys. Some more of that will come up on the channel. You can find everything we're doing over at Locked On Badgers or at Ryan and Bucky. Obviously, not many chances to get Bama on your home turf if you're a Big Ten school, right? So this is a huge, huge game for Wisconsin fans. We've circled it for a while. I think a lot of Badger fans are a little nervous, right? You want to have that spotlight, but you also don't. For years, I've said this before, it was kind of like Nebraska would have that spotlight. They would host Ohio State, and then the end of the game would be 41-10. Or, and so Badger fans are having a little nervous trepidation there, but it's a great week to be a Badger fan if you want to host one of the elite programs in college football. And we're all, like I said, we're excited. We are very excited. We're just trying to talk ourselves into the scenarios where Wisconsin maybe pulls the upset.
Nebraska has had that spotlight a few times here in the last 6-7 years since they've been down, where there might be a little fool's gold. Either it's so early in the season, their record's 2-0 against a couple of UTEPs, or one year they were 7-0 in 2016, and they went to Columbus, and there was a big deal made out of it, and it was 62-3 3 hours later. So, yeah, this edition may be a little bit better. Is there a Nebraska-Wisconsin game this year?
There is, and it's a road game for Wisconsin heading into Nebraska and heading into Omaha or Lincoln. Wisconsin has dominated that series since Nebraska came into the Big Ten. Wisconsin has absolutely dominated that series, but I got to be honest, he's still a freshman, and it's only 2 games. Raiola looks the part. He does some unique things as a quarterback, where looking to one side, then coming back against coverage, different arm angles. He looked really good against competition that's not great. I don't love Colorado, and UTEP is UTEP, but that's going to be a battle. I think Rules has done a great job rebuilding that. Their defensive line is really good, and I think the key part with Nebraska this year is their schedule is a runway, right? Their first 6-7 games are really pretty light, which allows a true freshman quarterback to build up steep. He's going to be able to ease into this year. So by the time Wisconsin gets him later in the year, you're not a true freshman anymore if you've played 7-8 games. So that's a scary game for me. I really like what Matt Rule has done there.
As Ryan mentions, everyone, Bama visiting Big Ten country is super rare. There was a date at Penn State against Joe Paterno. That's how long ago it's been. That's the last time Alabama came to a Big Ten stadium. They had a home with Penn State in, must have been 2010 and 11. And they won like 24-3 at Penn State. So Bama, Wisconsin, of course, they got together in 2015 in Houston. Derrick Henry had a big day. Wisconsin was roughly in the game. They kind of scored, and they would get kind of close, and then Bama took it away in the fourth quarter. 35-17 comes to mind for that one. Ryan Herrings with Locked On Badgers. So let's go to the defense, Ryan. What's missing from vintage Wisconsin defenses that we saw for the last 30 years? Most of the time that were top 5 in the nation.
Yeah. And a couple of NFL defensive linemen. I mean, sometimes I think there's a lot of Badger fans who talk about scheme who have been frustrated. Wisconsin's playing a lot of a 2-4-5 with kind of 2 outside linebackers right at the line of scrimmage. And both Western Michigan and South Dakota have had success on the ground. They've been able to run the ball a little bit. Western Michigan has a good running back, Buckley, but it's a MAC school. South Dakota is a very good FCS school, but as an FCS school, we've been pushed around a little bit. Zone blocking schemes have washed us out. It hasn't always been pretty, but I don't think it's a scheme thing. That is where I was going with this. Badger fans would like to see more of a 3-3-5, maybe a 3-3 stack, put some more people at the line of scrimmage. Though you mentioned those great Badger defenses. They had Keanu Benton, who's now with the Steelers. They had Isaiah Loudermilk. They had Matt Henningsen. those names may not be house, but they were all NFL draft picks. Those are all NFL guys on the defensive line. And you look at this version, this Badgers defense, and there just isn't an NFL defensive lineman. There's not a guy in the 2 deep that can, quite frankly, hold the point of attack consistently. So when those guys get washed out, then the linebacker group for Wisconsin, which I think is pretty good, it just gets mauled by offensive linemen because the defensive linemen aren't there to hold the point of attack. So I think it's as simple as that. I mean, the old saying, it's not about the X's and O's, it's about the Jimmies and the Joes. Wisconsin just doesn't have enough on the defensive line right now to kind of not even stalemate offenses. They're not even, forget getting penetration, they're just getting pushed off the line of scrimmage. So it's really hard to win college football games if you can't hold up in the trenches.
Jimmy's and Joe's, Ryan, have we seen enough of Luke Fickell's recruiting machine at Wisconsin to make an evaluation of how much of an upgrade that's going to be?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that have been the most positive development. If we're talking about the Paul Chryst era and the first couple years of the Luke Fickell era, I think this one is the one you look at and you say, we love where that's going. You're not going to see it right away, right? Because those players have to mature. They're freshmen and redshirt freshmen at this point. But Wisconsin has done a excellent job actually revamping their recruiting staff, landing one of the best classes they landed in Wisconsin history last year. A couple of those true freshmen are already getting on the field. Xavier Lucas is a potential star cornerback down from Florida. They pulled him from Miami. They wanted him. So the recruiting has been really good. They've won a lot of battles. They've upgraded the offensive line, cornerback spots. But the problem is those players take a couple years, right? So I think if you're taking the long-term view of this, those guys in 2025, 2026 could form the backbone of a really good Badgers team. But in 2024, it's hard to rely on freshmen and redshirt freshmen. So I think there's a bit of a transition period still going on. There's a lot of Paul Chryst players on this team, a lot of really good Paul Chryst players. But I think you're still seeing that transition from the end of his era to Luke Fickell's era. But the recruiting itself has been, by Badger standards, again, we're not going to recruit at Oregon's level, Ohio State's level. But by Wisconsin standards, it's definitely seen an uptick from what Paul Chryst was and where he was at.
Bama, Wisconsin, noon Eastern, 11 a.m. where it counts there in Madison. So get up early and get geared up for this one. And the Badgers in the Big Ten trying to hold home turf against one of the best in college football. Ryan Herring's work there at Locked On Badgers. Please check out Ryan and everything he's got to offer there on Locked On. Ryan, appreciate you stopping by to break this one down for us.
Now, humbled to be on, really appreciate it, and let's have a great weekend of football.
Awesome. Appreciate Ryan being here, and we've got a huge day at the Voice of College Football, so let's line it up for you. I'm not going to go through today's schedule because I would be here for 12 minutes, but it's posted on the X, Twitter. It's posted on the community page right here at the Voice of College Football. Next up in 5 minutes, Buckeyes Live on the Ohio State channel, and our premiere of Ole Miss Live Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Lucky for you, we're going to be right here, also on the SEC channel, also on the Ole Miss channel. We want you to go to the Ole Miss channel and please watch there. However, we will be here to get it established for the first few weeks. And Leanne Herring and myself, Ole Miss Live. We've got a Wake Forest preview and talking Ole Miss football top to bottom Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We're off to Buckeyes Live. Please head on over with us to the Ohio State channel. It's just a click away. See you in 5.